Warm welcome to everybody to Parallax Podcasts. I'm very happy to introduce these two gentlemen, Jordan Hall and Luke Behncke. Luke is doing a course for us on Gurdjieff and Christianity starting October 5th. And Jordan has become a kind of Christian voice, I would say, obviously, I've known Jordan for some time now and been listening to him, and I've always appreciated his very interesting insights on all kinds of things. So I wanted to hear you guys talk about Christianity, and I wanted to see if you can enlighten me more about, just I'd like to learn more about, Gurdjieff and Christianity, as I'm very fond of Gurdjieff and I have been for many years. So we'll start us off there. The first course that Luke is teaching is about Gurdjieff and modern Christianity. So maybe I'll pass it to you, Luke, and you can just frame that a little bit and see if that sparks any kind of thoughts from Jordan, if that's okay.
Yes, no, thank you, Andrew. Yes, this first course, how it came about, with all my time in the Gurdjieff groups, the Christian question, particularly as it related to Gurdjieff, seemed to be one of those things which was actively avoided, which I always found a little odd. Maybe there's some resurgence that's coming back. But Gurdjieff speaks a great deal about the Christian faith, and particularly Christ. In his view, it seems to be that the churches have become corrupt, that they've lost something. And he just had this question that maybe someone somewhere at some point knew something that might reignite or light the fire in Christianity. And so when you begin to read Gurdjieff and his travels and tales and who he met and all these brotherhoods, there's all of these threads that seem to join. And it seemed to be that right at the center of it was this Jesus Christ, this divine character. And he says a number of things about it. And he asserts that the original teaching of Jesus Christ is something that has been preserved, but also is not known up until the current time. And then he really doesn't say too much about it, but clearly he's had access to some form of knowledge of where the teaching of Christ has come from and how it has been preserved. And so that's a bit of a mystery in itself. But then he talks a great deal about his ideas, practices, and a range of other streams of thought that have really permeated from the past all the way through to contemporary times. So this interests me a great deal because often Gurdjieff is not connected to the Christian faith in any way, shape or form. Or if he is, he's just seen as this cultural Christian, someone who grew up in the Orthodox Church, but moved away and found a whole bunch of other knowledge and practices. And of course, for me, growing up as a Christian, it was drummed into me around the why and the what. But what I found was that the how seemed to be missing, this this practice, and I'm not just talking about the liturgy and church and the Eucharist and everything else. I'm talking about how one practices in everyday life. How does one turn the other cheek? How does one love one's neighbor when I can't even love myself or love God? These very practical, intimate, personal things. And so my experiences, very much of the Christian faith, was bureaucratic, if I can put it like that. All these rules, all these dogmas. And yet Gurdjieff said quite clearly, and all of his practices, is we need to follow the precepts of Christ. And only one who can follow the precepts of Christ could call themselves a Christian. And that stayed with me. And so even though technically I'm a Christian, I really hesitate to call myself a Christian because I can't follow the precepts of Christ. I can't. I try, but I fail constantly. But yet there's something in that. And so when I look at Gurdjieff and his practices and his ideas, the more and more I saw Christ. I saw something that Christ was saying, a calling, and yet it was very difficult to find my way to that because there was this gap. A gap between what was said in the why and the what, and just how do you get there? And not only collectively, but also personally. And so the more I've worked with Gurdjieff and his materials, the more it was just this question, why is the Christian question just avoided? And there are all these other claims about what he did and who he was, and which I think is fine, and Gurdjieff is very hard to pin down. But so is Christ. He's, for me, is the biggest mystery of all. And so if one is to follow the example of Christ, one is to follow the precepts of Christ, I really wish to know just how do I get there? Because I fall short. I fall short. And Gurdjieff, for me, I began to see was a way, a possibility of just taking a step closer. So that's sort of how the course has come about. It was this, I think it's time now, even though it's been written in the past, but Christianity has copped a bit of flack, and I think in many ways justly so. The church hasn't had a great history, but the church and Christ are two very different things. And so, kind of coming back to the essentials, which I think is difficult and a mystery, is something that interests me a great deal. So that was the question that brought me here. Where it goes from there, as I unravel, and where the course goes and where it might resonate with others, I don't know, but I just felt strongly it was a time to connect the dots, which are plainly there, and Gurdjieff speaks a great deal about them. They've just been ignored.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's even been some sort of resistance to the idea that Gurdjieff was a Christian. Yeah, even though I've read in certain passages that he considered himself, his teachings to be esoteric Christianity, whatever that is. And yet people are saying no, it's something else, and everyone's trying to claim this figure for their own particular agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, how do you thread the needle on that? So one thing that came up just then was almost by its very nature, Christianity is essentially esoteric. I mean, or even the Book of Job is essentially esoteric. The message of the Book of Job is, hey, I'm more than you can possibly understand. which doesn't mean that it is exclusively esoteric. There's exoteric elements, hence the notion of incarnation. I mean, back in the day, I'm sure that Jesus' breath smelled like something, so it was very exoteric. But of course, then the flip side is something like, and I'm sort of like noticing how all these different pieces come together in different complex ways. So when you lean towards the mystery aspect, then things can get very slippery very quickly. And so the more orthodox sensibility would say, hey, just be careful, or even just don't do that. Like, just, we're going to make three categories, right? The heretical, the canonical, and the apocryphal. And for the most part, the apocryphal is kind of like invisible. It's either canonical or heretical. That space in between is very sketchy. Right? So say, hey, we got the canonical, stick with that. If you kind of cross out of the canonical, you will be led astray, and better to be led 2 steps forward without going sideways than to have an error in what you're doing. So I get that. That makes sense. I mean, these things, we have how many countless thousands of people who've made all kinds of claims, maybe tens of thousands of people who've made all kinds of claims. And you've got the issue that no language can actually embody the logos. No mind can actually grasp the body of Christ. And so there's going to be a lot of confusion and a lot of cracks and lots of opportunities for either clever charlatanry in the middle there, or just straight up confusion and error. So that's that. Right? You've got that structure that's in place. But then you have the fact, like again, the deeper sense that this is ultimately something grounded in the mystery. There's no way around it, right? The relationship between the finite and the infinite is not ever going to be grounded in the finite. So it has to be grounded in the infinite, which means the finite is always going to be running up against its limitations of sheer finitude. And so adopting some posture of the esoteric, some quality of relationship with mystery is unavoidable. So now you're going to be running around with a bunch of the characters who do that kind of thing, of which Gurdjieff is a member of that crew. Right? He's got a lineage of people who play in that space. Somewhat separately, although oddly enough, how do I say it? Synchronistically, I was handed by someone who chose to drive all the way to my neighborhood and hand me this book, that big, thick book called Meditations on Tarot and Christian Hermeticism. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Tom Berg's book. I've got it
Yeah,
up here.
don't tell me his real name. I don't believe in that. As far as I'm concerned, he is unknown friend.
We're not supposed to use his real name, right?
That's
He
right.
didn't want us to. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will honor that. Which is of the same lineage, right? It's of the lineage of the esoteric, in his case, Hermeticism. And I feel very comfortable with the fact that that is good. I feel very comfortable with the fact there's a richness that's developing for me in my walking in the discipleship of Christ by virtue of this relationship with the unknown author of that book. Right. So there's something that is available, and I would say also something now necessary. There really is no way, because if you try to, how do we say that right? If you, that's not like evacuate, it's almost more like dehydrate. If you dehydrate the living water of mystery out of Christ, the desiccated body of bureaucracy, which is left over, it looks like something, right? It has an image, but it's not alive. And that's not any good. So we're stuck. There's no way around it. We have to find some way of having these qualities of relationship. And so then the question again is all the way back to the one that you mentioned. Okay, how? How do we do that? So what sorts of things come from your, one last thing. I noticed that the name Gurdjieff, which had not shown up in my consciousness for at least a decade until a month ago, showed up 3 times in 3 days, one after the other. So when you wrote me, Andrew, by the way, yours is the last, I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to talk about Gurdjieff.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So, yes. So then the question would be something like, okay, so what does that look like? What kinds of things come forward that are like properly grounded, but also alive and rich?
Yeah. Well, I've known a lot of people on the edges of Christianity, kind of, who couldn't quite find a church. You guys are part of a church, and you know, and I'm a tantric Buddhist, and I would say I have a connection to Christianity as well. But I never found a church, so I became a Buddhist. Like everything I found was the desecrated corpse of Christianity. I never found living Christianity anywhere, whereas I found living Buddhism. It just that
Mhm.
was just my particular path. Even though I've always been very, very open, and especially to the people kind of on the edges of Christianity, like who were, you know, really searching for something but unable to become orthodox, dogmatic, straightforward. And I'm not saying that those people are bad or anything like that. Um, I just find that there's a lot of people on the edges of Christianity, and I guess that's changing a little bit, or something's happening in the culture where people are becoming, people are actually committing to it, or
Mhm.
going back to church and things like that. But I
Well,
wonder about Gurdjieff as this person kind of on the edge of Christianity, in a sense. Um,
we've gone through a sort of a cycling of a cultural recognition of the fact that it's like the parental advice of leaning on your own understanding is likely to lead you astray turns out to be very true. And so
mhm.
people are like, whoa, wow, we thought we were much smarter than we were, or much wiser than we were, or at least much prettier than we were. And wow, that led us astray. Okay, so right, and then falling back into, I guess I'll just step away from that entirely. And what would be interesting is to preemptively even begin the reintroduction of the mystery into that, so you don't just slide into into death, into desiccated corpse. I think that's a perfectly good metaphor. Just cycling back and forth between kind of like dead and the evaporated doesn't do you any good. What you want to do is to find a way to land here and then be held in this place, um, which I think is actually quite alive right now. I think that the movement, the cultural moment, is one that is going to be radically increasing the attention on this set of questions, and to the degree to which there's a way to provide, what's the right way of putting it? Yeah, it's really interesting because you don't want to do something which is seductive, or you don't want to do something which is alluring but confusing or disempowering. But, I guess maybe an on-ramp or a hand. A hand is maybe even just a very simple way of putting it, so that people who are on that edge can find their way in properly. And people who are in can find their way to that aliveness properly. And so the whole thing
Exactly.
just
Yeah,
becomes
that's
richer.
good. Yeah, that's great because the people who are in are often like, I know people who are born into Christianity, often just it's not alive for them because they do it by rote, right?
Yeah.
And then people like you, perhaps, who are outside for so long, once you find it, it's very alive for you because you found it, you found it.
Mhm.
So that's very interesting. I feel the same way in terms of my own spiritual practice. I think in a way I feel grateful that I was born in a kind of spiritual wasteland, so that when I found the thing, it was alive for me, and I could, I could embrace it with a passion, instead of just being born in the comfort of the givens of Christendom, or whatever religion you might be born in. Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm really interested, Luke, in what sorts of things that you found in this exploration.
Yes, I maybe I wanted to touch on a point that you raised, which I find interesting, and I do touch on it in the course, that perhaps the way in which the Gurdjieff work has unfolded uh, since his death and even before his death, the way that groups are arranged and the way that people work with each other, in a sense, is outside of the church, but perhaps maybe an entry point, um, that can bring people back to the church. And I know that others seem to have that view. And I've certainly found that in my experience, there seems to be an aversion to walk into a church. It's a bit too much, or it's loaded with all sorts of negative meaning for others. But yet, starting a little bit further back, maybe in smaller groups, in loose networks, that just begin to give a bit of a taste and open up this question without the palavra, just keeping in its raw form, tends to bypass something and goes, if I can call this, straight to the heart of things. But yet you're quite right. There does need to be a support structure around it. Gurdjieff used to call it a crutch. All teachings, all of these sorts of things are a crutch until we can stand on our own. That doesn't mean that we throw the crutches away. We might need them. We pull them in case we trip over or fall over. But at the end of the day, to stand in Christ, or as much as we can, and to be part of the body of Christ, there's a strange, I need to know me, I need to know myself, and yet at the same time, I'm not that. And so Gurdjieff had this very interesting view that all spiritual paths, and I would probably say that the path to Christ is inherently fraught with risk, inherently. And these support structures are needed for a time, and one needs to have a sense of that so one can understand things for themselves. But the trick is, I think, where Gurdjieff was going is, if you rely upon the support structures too much, then everything still becomes outside of you rather than inside of you. But yet one still needs the support structures. No one's immune from that. We're all fragile. So there's this interesting sense of when I need it, when I don't need it. And early on, certainly for me, one needs a lot of support. You're completely lost. There's a feeling, there's my life has changed. And yet, where do I go? How do I even take the first step? And yet one becomes a bit more certain in the path that's being trod, while at the same time keeping to this unknown, keeping to this mystery that I need to be cautious, I need to be careful. But at the same time, like the drama of Christ, man, this is a risk, because literally your life is at stake. And that's the greatest risk of all. So playing it safe, playing it too safe is a question, but taking too many risks and being silly, which, there's a lot of that sort of happens in these sorts of circles. So this interesting intelligence that needs to be brought to the situation constantly about what is it that I need? Where's this next step? I may not know, but I take neither personal script nor two cloaks. I just follow something, have faith in that, and yet also have a sense when I'm going on the wrong track. I'm clearly going down a path, or at least having someone there who might nudge you and go, you might need to put that in question. And that for me is the mystery. This form structure is needed, but yet just enough. And yet when to let go of all of that and just allow oneself to be immersed in whatever it is. Very difficult.
The easy version of that, but which is by no means easy, is actually just regular old-fashioned parenting.
Yeah.
But ordinary situation, right? There's no book, there's no guide, there's no teaching that will give you a simple structure. At the end of the day, you have to, every relationship with your child is perfectly and completely fraught, because it's absolutely impossible to know what is right, and everything will have absolutely maximum impact on the thing that you love, at least close to the center of the most. And so it's, that's the learning context, right? Okay, So it's like that in this case with you. Now, here's something that made me laugh earlier. And in a second, I'm really interested if you could just give me some examples of how Gurdjieff has helped you in this.
Yeah.
But in terms of structure, what I noticed is that we do, as Christians, have a really beautiful structure that's built in, which is you have the Holy Spirit helping you always from the inside, right? And you have to learn how to listen, how to come into relationship, which is its own travail, its own work, but it's there. She, he, it depends. You have the Father, which in this case we could see as the sort of the transcendent structure coming out, down, and in, that structures reality in ways that are just how reality is, the isness of it. For example, there's much more to it, but that's just one piece. And then you have the Son, right? And the Son is also present and available. So it's we don't live in a universe that is that we're just sort of thrown into with a go ahead and figure it out on your own, good luck kind of a situation. We're rather thrown into a reality that is super saturated with divine attention and divine intention and divine activity. And our responsibility, our invitation, and our possibility is to learn how to perceive that and to learn how to be supported by it and to learn how to then ultimately dance with it. And so this is where so now the crutches become quite interesting, because the crutches are these steps that, and interesting. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but there's a real problem in parenting with, remember those things that were very popular from probably the 70s up until, I don't even know how long, like little walkers. They're sort of wheeled vehicles you could put a toddler in and stand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turns out those are a terrible idea. They accelerate you through developmental stages that you actually need. You need to be crawling and on your belly and learning how to stand up in the right order, because there's a lot of stuff that is load bearing that needs to happen. And by the way, not just for walking, but for like forward planning and emotional regulation, how to relate to other people, that is all in there. So crutch structuring, that just, as you said, that the lightest possible touch in what is otherwise a process that will unfold under its own, the natural orienting basis of humans. Holy smokes, yeah. And then you say, oh, gosh, what flashed to me was like the degree to which all of culture is a gigantic set of crutches gone awry. The hard part is not us being in relationship with God. The hard part is us navigating the havoc of 10,000 years of crutches gone awry, and how that throws us way off, and we have to find a way to get back in.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, no, and it's quite poignant to your question around what, one of the things that has helped me in the Gurdjieff work, and I think, which I had a resistance to it early on, but Gurdjieff's idea that we live in sleep, that we have this automatism in us, that is the majority of our life, this mechanicalness that he speaks of. He used those sorts of metaphors, which of course I went, oh, okay, but that's kind of rubbish. I've been to university, I'm reasonably bright, I can, blah, 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 blah. And then when one engages in certain exercises, just very simple ones, where I begin to see, and this is me, I begin to see I'm not there. I say all these things, I do all these things, and I seem to be going through the motions. Every now and again, some form of awareness pops up in me, in between these very large kind of oceans of something happened. I don't know what. It's like driving a car and you go from home to and then all of it, you're there. Well, you can remember, that's right, I did do that, but you're not there, you're not present.
Yeah.
You're not present. And so that begins little by little to start to erode of what's commonly called one's ego, which I have a large one for a whole range of sort of reasons. And that humbling factor, that confession that maybe I'm not as good as what I think I am, starts to, and certainly helped me begin to think, well, what else is there that I'm not aware of in myself, let alone others? What am I not seeing because I'm caught up in this machinery? And everyone's got it.
Mhm.
And I see it in others, but can I see it in myself? And then with that, what's been helpful with that continual confession of, wow, one can move into quite a negative state because you start to think you're a loathsome creature. But
Mhm.
also something else begins to arise, is we're all in the same boat.
Mhm.
We're all like this. And that becomes harrowing, the terror of the situation, as Gurdjieff would call it. And then something, for me anyway, that became very helpful over time is whatever path I'm treading, I'm not adding to my bag of tricks. I'm not trying to make myself kind of better, this spiritual acquisition.
Mhm.
In a way, there's a lot of me that just needs to drop away or loosen up so something else can come in. Just I am what I am, but I need to make way for something else. And that for me culminated in this, well, to really let it in, I've really got to give up something.
Mhm.
And that's this illusion of this, whatever it is, because I see it's just a sleeping thing, but yet this quality can come through bit by bit that can relate and can be in relationship. And I found that only when I'm in that quality state, which doesn't have to be a mystical, heavenly thing, but I'm just a bit more present, I'm a bit more here,
Yeah.
changes everything. Just changes my responses and reactions in so subtle ways that only over years and years of practice do you see, wow, how far I've come. Well, maybe that's not the right way to say it, but how much has dropped away
Mhm.
and how much of something that's more genuine can come through.
Mhm.
And
Which
so
allows
this,
you to be a parent, right? That's really
yeah,
interesting. I
that's,
can relate that
yeah,
to what Jordan was saying about parenthood, because
yeah.
Yeah.
this is what your children need, that more refined and higher form of attention, which allows them to grow and to be and not to be terrified and oppressed by whatever is coming at them. Or
Mhm.
And they need to see, they need to see mum and dad, and I'll say mum and dad, be vulnerable, you know, you know,
Mhm.
pray to the Lord. Oh my God, I don't know what to do here. I need guidance.
Mhm.
And yet, and to see what unfolds, and that it's okay. It's
Mhm.
okay. There's something in them that they can tap into eventually, at some point, maybe when they're
Mhm.
ready. And that's the wonderful thing. I can remember my own grandparents who had a tumultuous marriage their entire life. This was through the Depression years and out of wedlock and all those sorts of things. And I can remember in their elderly age, the only time I saw a harmonious relationship was when I sat with them in the mornings as they were both reading the Bible together. And that impression that there was something that could bring them together was just profound to me.
Hmm.
I didn't understand it. I was only young, but I'm glad I had that experience.
Man.
I wonder about this notion of sleep. Because I was thinking, I just listened to a podcast with Matthew Pageau. I don't know if you've seen that recently, Jordan, but
I have.
he was
Let's,
talking about sleep.
let's keep reinforcing it. Everybody needs to watch it.
It's incredible. It just made me think so much about, and it also makes me think that the Gurdjieff work taken the wrong way, it could lead to too much willfulness too much extreme willfulness, right? Because the other side of, it's kind of a very masculine teaching in many ways. It's like conscious suffering, awareness, et cetera, et cetera. But then the other side of our existence is sleep and the dissembling of things and dream and um anyway, just a thought. I don't know how to go any further with that, but
Well, oh boy, that's complex. And
yeah.
yeah, it's complex. But what you have there is you have the infolding of the feminine. And so the notion of sleep is used differently in both those senses. And
Yes.
in the first sense, it's used in the inverse of the way Matthew is bringing back. So Matthew is bringing back a version of sleep that has the characteristic of the double toxin, right? Or I think the language of recovery is very nice. A fundamental language, as fundamental as the language of creation, but it comes in a very different way, and you can't
So
get there.
so I mean it could be this recovery, this nourishment, the sleep, but it could also be this mechanical dark,
Exactly,
some somnulistics. So I don't know if that's the word. This
somnambulism.
Yeah, this kind of sleepwalking mechanicalness that Gurdjieff talks about, which would be
And
more the dark feminine, like being overcome by the dark feminine in a sense.
the distance, and there's like also over here, there's the madness, right?
Yeah.
So you've got and the madness and the self-forgetting seem very similar. So we could spend plenty of time, I think, going into that, and maybe we need to. Maybe that's where we are, this moment, because there's yeah. God, how do you even do this?
Well, maybe just to
Hmm,
add something else there, that this idea of sleep is very much grounded in qualities of energies, that there's literally a quality of energy that we can imbue in us through practice. This sometimes called presence, where I collect myself in a certain way. Attention, which means to collect oneself. That helps to raise this quality up, like a food, where in a more collected way, there's, so to say, a more concentrated form of consciousness or attention or awareness that allows me to just emerge a little bit more out of this sleeping state, just a little, to see the sleeping state.
hmm,
And so this is the difficulty when this energy is not there. It's a literal energy, and there's all sorts of practices and exercises that Gurdjieff brought around raising this up a little. Without this energy, I literally don't even see my own sleep. There is not enough fuel in my attention tank, if you'd like. I'm kind of dissipated. I'm fragmented in all of my parts. And so I see I'm working in bits of myself, these many eyes, these many selves, as Gurdjieff calls it. So quite a key practice in the Gurdjieff work is twofold, really. One, I see my sleep. I must see my sleep. But also at the same time, I also see the possibility to come out of it. And so these two things are, in a sense, the struggle, where I see this and I see that. And I also see it in my own Christian faith. That I read the precepts of Christ. I read Christ's life, and it's beautiful. And at the same time, I see also how I fall short. But something in the middle emerges for me, a motivation. There's something that goes, this makes
hmm,
sense.
hmm,
This is a direction. I may fumble, I may fall, I may forget, but that's the only thing that makes sense,
hmm,
because the rest of the world just eats me alive. And so this is where Gurdjieff was coming from, and hence this risk when one sets forth in trying to come to this essential is how to hold these two forces in balance. I see my sleep. I see I'm not here. I'm just an automaton. But yet there is a chance, a possibility to not only begin to see that, but also a way forward where maybe I can transform into a different being, one that potentially could hold this energy longer, that could be a good container for this quality. And so everyone's had these experiences. Everyone's had an experience of presence and quality where life takes on a new color. Things are different. I relate different. I can think different. And then the next moment I'm plunged back into, whatever I'm kind of doing. And then 10 years later, I go, what's just happened? So this is this interesting idea and work that really brought me into this. Here is the tension. I am a limited human trying to move towards this infinite mystery.
So I'm just going to, for disambiguation purposes, G sleep and P sleep.
Right.
So we can be clear. But what I was seeing there is funny. Now I feel all these commentators commentating, but there's something that happens. Okay, let's put it this way. Imagine a community where there's been a certain amount of ability to move through presence and deeper, richer, more fully surrendering into that, and therefore to do away with more and more and more of G sleep, and to pour yourself into P sleep, which is, by the way, the microcosmic version of that is, I see the precepts of Christ, I fall short, I then confess, repent, and restored. Right? And then and in that process, there's a necessity of that process, because the process of recognizing I fall short is a harrowing, right, a smoothing out of something that I could never have gotten to, but by virtue of running into it, it happens. Then I confess it, then I repent, then I am restored and brought back through. Right, so that cycle of peace sleep, and then continuing to avoid or grow beyond the scaffolding of what the role that has been developed, and I'm going to simply propose improperly or as a distraction of this category of G sleep. So now imagine a community of people who are operating in that way. And so now it's not just you, but one, but now it's a family and a community and a church, right? A church operating in that way, a church where the wholeness of life is held in an increasing capacity to be individually and corporately in presence, and where the role of peace sleep is perceived and understood properly, both in the ordinary fashion of actually falling asleep and in the sacred fashion of repentance and renewal. And that all of the different elements of the scaffolding, think about that, the scaffolding, the crutches, and here I would even say very precisely things like society and institutions, actually go away, because this present corporate and individual presence enables the word that pops into my head is the easy yoke. Like it begins to allow you to start to actually steer life by means of very, very tight stewardship with Christ himself. And then you don't need any other kind of governance or institution. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Jordan. In Bubsy Bub's Tales to his grandson, Gurdjieff highlights this interesting character called Ashiata Shimash, who he says achieved what no other genuine messenger has ever achieved, which is simply promulgating a teaching, if you like, person to person in a series of collective networks, where the chief aim was just to try to make a connection with what Gurdjieff called sacred conscience, which is or represents God. This very practical thing. that everything else found its place. The birth and kind of death rate was able to moderate. Wars started to dissipate. People who had positions of power by birth then let that go and gave those positions to people of merit. All because there's this very simple, as you were saying, just coming back. If the collective and the individual have this sense of needing to keep this tension, but all the way up, it's not just about me. It's not just about my search or my enlightenment or my transformation, but this earnestness of to transform the group, the church, its corporate functions, all the way up, all the way down, this macro, micro, this penetration. And indeed, when Gurdjieff died, that was his great wish, is to have what he brought permeate bit by bit through various kind of mechanisms, if you'd like, that could reach out and begin to help and support this alignment, which he said would take a great deal of time and, more importantly, a great deal of conscious effort. And it needed conscious people, and it needed hard work, service and sacrifice, very much akin to what we've been talking about parenting, which is a really good example of service and sacrifice. If I can approach it like that, there's lots of parents who approach their children as trophies, and so that creates all sorts of issues. So my sense is, and looking at the early church and the Pauline epistles and everything else, I see a great kind of resonance in what you've said and in what Gurdjieff was trying to bring and what the early church was, that there's this kind of distributed community who individually and collectively are trying to work with each other in such a way as to be this collective presence, which I would call the real body of Christ.
Yeah. And you ended that just right, because the fact of the presence of the Holy Spirit is what helps or enables that to actually, let's say, work, to be very precise.
Yes.
It's what my friend Primavera Filippi either coined or shared with me, the difference, a new term, extratution. So instead of institution, extratution. And okay, so that's one. The early Christian community is entering into relationship with a Greco-Roman world that is clearly wrong. And therefore they're highly disoriented. They are in relationship with institutions by nature, no way around it, but they are always in a ameliorative relationship, a coping. Okay, I don't have any expectation, hope, or illusion that to be a slave-holding patrician is a valuable thing. It may be where I happen to be, but I'm not aspiring to be that. I am in a place of deep disorientation with regard to the institutions, the cultural norms, the scaffolding, the G-sleep, frankly, of the world in which I am. And so therefore, I'm quite liberated to try to understand how to orient myself on the basis of presence, and then cultivate it in the quality of presence. Sorry, I'm holding this here. I have to keep the other one. So parenting, right? If you could go as parents and say, look, I could just give you good parenting. This is very easy. Learn how to be fully present all the time. If you can give your child full presence all the time, and you and your partner can give your child fully presence all the time, then parenting happens immediately in that context. There's two problems. One problem is we're all governed by frames. Use it. Leave your father and mother and cleave to your wife, cleave to your partner. Leave the image of how things should be done. Leave the model of repetition of forms and images, institutions that are received, however, impressions, ways of doing that are not governed by spirit in presence, but are governed by the mind in emulation, or habits of the body, right? Leave that. So if you enter into parenting in the triadic dance of you, your partner, and your child, and you're all able to be in presence all the time, then things are going to work out. Problem number one, we're raised entirely away from that. And problem number two, I've actually never met anybody who can be fully present all the time. And so I'm not sure exactly how one pulls that off. And in the 85 to 97% of the time where that's not available, got to do something. Right? And so that creates a like a procession. Now you're definitely off, and you may be very off, and that creates this thing that has to be dealt with. And sort of you're out there. But the reason why I bring that up is kind of the fractal verticality of it is that this relationship, I'm saying down because as an adult man, I look down at my children geometrically, not spiritually. But it's helpful because I can also then use vertically up with the triune God, that same presence works the other way around. In other words, God is fully present all the time. And when we are present, we are available for the quality of relationship that is the presence of God. And so it is only when we are present, when we are not asleep, that we are available to actually cultivate that relationality. So it's like these steps: presence, relationality, faith, right? Faith is just a cultivated relationship that is grounded and embodied. And then you can start moving from there. Yeah, I think this is right, actually. And so those people, and we even have Gurdjieff, but the whole point is actually not them, but rather the degree to which the standing wave of their event in life has led to a certain capacity and wisdom that is embodied in people can help us now in this moment of great and increasing disorientation with the scaffolding and structure that is in the process of actually being left behind.
So I think when you were talking about the early Christians and the Greeks and the Romans, that I think there's a clear analogy to our time right now. Is there not? Is that what you were going to? Is that were you making that point?
Yes,
Jordan?
yes.
Yeah.
We are moving into a time of equal or greater disorientation with regard to those habits, which is very troubling, but it's actually incredibly liberating because we needed to be liberated from those habits and institutions.
Yeah.
We're being shaken awake, whether we like it or not.
So it's like the worst of times and the best of times in a sense.
You should write a book. Start it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's really true, though. I think that this is the best time ever to do this kind of investigation in history in some ways. And it's also the most fraught and the most complex and the most and we're the most damaged, and there's the and there's the most danger, knocking at our door.
Yeah. That's oh, okay, neat. So what I noticed there in the way that you're describing it is the great question of disposition and vocation. A while back, I had a conversation with, I think, Benjamin Boyce. And in that very specific context, I was making an analogy with the Titanic. And you're on the Titanic, and the Titanic has hit an iceberg. It's in the process of sinking, and your toilet is clogged. And if you're focusing down on the tactical problem of your toilet being clogged, and you really think the problem to be solved is that, you may not be paying attention to a bigger context. Okay. Now, in that frame, in that very specific frame, all the details matter. Let me see. If your vocation and your calling is to actually unclog the toilet, and you're in a body of Christ in this context that we were talking about. So I'm gesturing to you, Luke. I don't know where you are in your environment. Then things start to work properly. Does that make sense? What I'm saying is, if you hear what Andrew just said, this is the worst of times, the best of times. This is the highest stakes. We're the most traumatized. Fill in the blank. And your initial response is to be like, that sounds like a lot. I'm out of here.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's really just two questions. One is that actually what your proper disposition and vocation is? Like if your vocation is to go over there and grow really nice kale, then that's what you should be doing. And you should be doing the thing that you're called to do. And this is like, you get to the final endpoint, that the actual answer to the Titanic is the body of Christ. That's the key, right? The actual answer to the Titanic is to find out how your relationship with God is pointing you to the peace that is yours precisely. And then in this quality of reciprocally opening presence, to participate in that peace with the people around you. Right. So if it is, in fact, your specific response, God-given responsibility to unclog the toilet, then unclog the toilet. Right. But there's a difference between that and you're choosing strategically to do that. So once we've moved, we're no longer in strategy. We're now in relationality. We're in presence. We're in cultivating relationship with the Holy Spirit. We're in this whole different thing. When we, and now I'm saying we corporately are in an embodiment of that corporate embodiment in this way is the way to respond to the meta crisis, to just use the term.
Yeah, it's you said something recently. I think you said it's beyond the strategic, sort of just beyond being strategic. Like, I think that the thing that people have to realize is that the human being on its own is pretty fucked. And we're not able to do things by our own devices, right? This is the whole lie of, I think, the secular world, right? There's no chance we can fix things that way. There has to be what you would call it, the Holy Spirit. There has to be a connection to that. Otherwise, nothing works. Everything's broken. Everything's, seems like that to me anyway.
Yeah, and this is where the seduction into the other branch, right? There's basically two branches. The other branch is the Superman branch. And the other branch is the sort of the individual enlightenment, whether it's a Nietzschean one or it's some other, there's many lineages, right? By doing some kind of hard work with the appropriate breathing technique and the appropriate focus of my attention and certain esoteric practices, I can achieve a level of sovereignty in the world where I can be equal to and master the environment that I'm in. And so take libertarianism and multiply it by, lineage. And that, when you hit that branch, you realize that's the branch that doesn't work. Like, it's not like ordinary human agency it is fine. Like, that doesn't work. But
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Superman doesn't work. Now we're got back into humility, right? So many of the things that even the way that Luke was expressing himself was an expression of this process. He even put it very precise, like even the language of growth or development was actually more like shedding or letting pass away. And just even thinking about that as a way of thinking about what proper, let's just say, agency or whatever you want to put it is.
Yes, it is. It's an interesting, and I've seen it, and I think the Gurdjieff work is very at risk, particularly the way how things have been presented in the past, and even the way that they're presented now. This kind of development of all these powers. You transform by being functionally more powerful, smarter, all of these sorts of things. And I think, and certainly through my experience, one needs to explore all of those things, explore the development of human powers, which is real, but also leads to a dead end, at least for me. What is it, that saying, God laughs at he who plans anything? It really comes back of, well, where am I in the world? What is my relationship? And in a sense, I need to have quite a good assessment, not only of me as a person. I'm not talking about my character, but just what is it that I can and can't do. And at least for me, everything else kind of governs me, except at moments making an effort to bring a quality of attention that helps something. Everything else is is an illusion, or it's a trap. It's a
Mm.
trap. You feel as though you become more powerful, more,
So
smarter, or emotionally more passionate, or all of these things. And it's a slippery slope, and take something away from you. Where this shedding, this shedding is very
Yeah.
interesting. It allows something, and Gurdjieff talks about this, that our real consciousness, our subconsciousness, and what's in it is buried, but still in a pristine state. It's
Mm.
hiding in us because of all of this modern guff that's grafted onto us. And if we can just gently, very gently, allow this to just drop away, that can rise up. That can begin to grow in
Mhm.
a more fundamental way without it being smothered by the weeds of ego. And so this becomes a very interesting thing, is when one starts, I'm looking through the lens of ego all the time. And
Mhm.
I see this a lot
Yes.
in spiritual circles. One comes to it with, what can I get? What's in it for me? What's the power that's going to make me $1 million, and have all of this sex, and like it's a very natural, which in a way overshadows this very real feeling that there's something very much buried inside that needs to come out. And so this is I found, and particularly in the Gurdjieff work, because it brings it out so much, that people come with it with this honest feeling of search, that something is not right and I need to find my way, but always through the instrument that one always uses to get by in the world.
Mhm.
Competitiveness, call it ego, but this competitiveness, trying to acquire stuff. And so it takes a long time for something else, the lamb in us, as Gurdjieff
Mm.
would, to start to live in harmony, or at least live in a way with this wolf that Gurdjieff talks of, this outer covering, this user interface that needs to interact with the world, make money, pay bills, all those sorts of things,
Mm.
but how to bring them into relationship and balance. And when one is much larger than the other, well, the relationship is one of dominance. But when things begin to be a bit more balanced, or really one begins to drop away a little and allows something else to come through, I begin to, and the only word that comes to me, shalom,
Mm.
I get what I need. It's not so much the translation into English of the word peace, which is a bit loaded with meaning, but I get what I need,
Mm.
naturally get what I need. So this
Mm.
is interesting. And this other point that you made about this, and Andrew made about this, this uh, period of time that we live in. Gurdjieff brought his teaching in between World War I and World War II, which was very interesting, where the conditions were very difficult. His family was massacred. He lost his wife to cancer. All of these things, and he said in a roundabout way, when people said, "Wow, this how can you bring something like this when the world is in this terrible state?"
Mm.
And he said, "This is the only time that this could be brought." So I have this sense, and maybe it speaks to what you were saying earlier, this full circle, from the early church Roman days to now, where things are
Mm.
topsy-turvy, tearing themselves apart, that this is the only time that something else can come in, because everything's been put in question and there's a great deal of energy. And that energy either plummets, as Gurdjieff would say, into who knows where, normally into wars and all those sorts of things, or it has the opportunity to go the other way. So I find this a very interesting period in time.
Mm.
Yeah, I like your point, Jordan, about the Superman. I think that's very important. And I also like your point, Luke, about this. It's sort of a subtle shift, right? It's like it's like there's not much you can do in a way except sort of turn your attention very subtly towards something different or what really matters. Um, Often, like whatever is happening is really beyond your control. I mean, we're kind of in pretty good. I'm in a good situation, but this could turn on a dime at any moment, and the bombs could start to fall, and anything can happen, right?
Mm.
Yes.
So how do like Jordan's saying when you're like the Titanic's going down and it's like yeah how do we keep that attention? It's easy to keep when things are going well, you're all right and things are fine and you can sort of have a pretense of a spiritual life.
Mm. That's a
Yeah,
really good way of putting it. Yeah, there's a lot of that, isn't there? There's a lot of things are going fine, and therefore I can have a pretense of a spiritual life.
yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Hmm. Yeah, I was seeing the wolf and the lamb, and I was seeing the fact that the wolf is a pack animal, and the wolf yearns to be put in an honorable place in the pack. And so the restoration of the wolf to the left hand of the lamb, to be sent out to do things specific and to return back and to be given honor for having done things well, is actually what the wolf yearns for.
Yes.
Um, because it's hard to pay taxes in presents. That's what they're for, I think. I think they're entirely designed to make that impossible.
You don't want to pay them. I'm not going to pay
You
them. I have to, but
clearly have no actual financial connection to the funding of the government. That much I am quite confident of. Um, so there was one other thing that seemed like it was available right now. Um, hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So back to the Lamb and the Wolf. There's what is it? Because you got something. So it's much easier. Uh, for a rich man to get into heaven is really tough because they really think the wolf is working, and so the poor lamb just keeps calling, and they have no way of hearing it. Um, as we move forward, let's just say as individuals, I've had this experience that I've just noticed over and over again that my wolf, which by the way was a pretty darn good wolf, but when I finally put that wolf to the tasks that actually mattered in life, I discovered that he was not the right kind of animal for those tasks. And more and more and more of life, it turns out that's just the case. And so this allowed this, that's humility, right? The humility to say, oh, wait a minute, this is wrong, this is off. And what does this other thing look like? And more of life, just to practice, like saying, okay, and now here I'm when things are doing well, you can also choose to say, what would it look like to invest in actually living the spiritual life? How do I just I'm not currently having to deal with a lot of stuff for the next 2 hours. What's it like to come into as deep a presence as I can and learn the presence of God and build a relationship with God and notice what faith actually means, those kinds of things. That might be a useful thing to do. Might be a good
yeah.
practice.
If you have time, like, wow. If you
Yeah.
have time, time is amazing if you have it.
Yeah.
Because,
And it's funny because for the most part, most people waste the time that they have
yeah,
and they don't have it, but it's because they've already spent it in G sleep.
totally. And that's the horror that Gurdjieff speaks about, he says, that um, this mechanicalness and this waste of the precious substance of our lives, which need to be, I guess, I don't know, the Sufis talk about sacrifice as like, you give spiritual energy. And when you do that, you prevent war or, you prevent by making that sacrifice. You don't have to sacrifice an animal or, actually by doing that, that's what prevents the, things going to hell. Um, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's interesting when you were both talking, which has stayed with me, and it's at my own, if you'd like, kind of mantra, but um, Gurdjieff repeatedly states that when things are difficult, that is the best time to work because there's energy that's available in the difficulty that wouldn't be there otherwise.
Mm.
And my own experience when life is good is it's actually really difficult for me to
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 work,
make
yeah.
that connection. Yeah, because life's good. It's like, hey, I'm fed, roof over my head, kids are happy, all good. Done my job. Thank you very much, God. But yet,
Time to turn on the telly. Let's watch a little
yeah,
bit of
turn
football.
on.
Yeah.
Yep, watch the football, have some popcorn, all good.
But Jordan's
And
point's interesting though, because like it's when we have this luxury of time and stuff,
yes,
do we need to make everything hard? Like, does it have to be, do we have to go and out into the wilderness and like the early Christians, do we have to go to the desert and suffer in this intense way? Or could we do it? Could we actually do it can we, you say it's difficult for the rich man, but I was reading something, there's the way of the way of the difficult way, the hard way. But there's also kind of that's not the whole story. I feel. I feel that it's possible. I feel that
We had
it's
an
possible that you could do it even in the luxury of your good life if you really wanted to. Um,
I
and
looked.
I
I
don't know if
mean,
I've clearly articulated that, but
try this. I
sorry to
did some.
interrupt, Luca.
I did an etymology and I looked up two words. One was opulare, and the other was abundare. So opulare is the root of opulence.
Hmm.
And so opulence is too muchness. And opulence actually in its most basic means having a very large amount of things in store. So I've got a granary full of grain. So I have opulare.
Yeah.
Um, but of course, it ultimately ends up carrying a negative connotation. There's reasons for that. Abundare, abundance, means that I have access to a plentiful water supply, which is very different. I have access to something which is a process, which is a flow. And it's something where I am dependent. Opulare, I am independent. I have all the things I need in a warehouse. I'm independent of farming. I'm independent of my community. Worst case scenario, I could just go to my warehouse and get my food. I'm independent. Abundare, I'm dependent. I'm dependent on the flow. I can't take the water with me. If I drink it, if I go away from it, if I go far from it. So what do? Well, I actually give other people my abundare. I invite other people to my overflowing spring, and together we can build greater abundare, right? And so these both words, in some sense, mean I'm doing well.
Mm,
Both words actually refer to that, but the
wonderful.
distinction is the distinction.
Got it. And also the grain could just rot, if
And it will
the
rot.
water it will rot and whereas the water will,
Mhm.
there's always sources.
Opulence is a trap. Oh, I was laughing earlier because I don't know if you were exactly saying it, Luke, but you said something which the pattern is, oh, so you're suggesting that eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil might be a trap. And that was the frame, right? The frame is there's all these things that live in this horizontal domain where the wolf and mastery of our environment, the Superman, these are all of that domain of Earth. And the thing that's tricky about it is that that's actually a trap. It's not just an error. It's not just a distraction. It's an intentional distraction designed to take you away from presence, right? To take you away from the time spent cultivating the relationality and cultivating the faith. So it's important to keep that in mind. Right? We have both our own difficulties, our own tendency to fall into G sleep, but we also have traps that are cunningly cultivated to pull us away.
mm, mm.
Well, I have a question like about Jordan was talking about goodness, right? The fact that in the Bible it said and it was good, like the existence is good. And often when I read Gurdjieff, he seems to paint another kind of story, like he talks about human beings as the unfortunates, and so I kind of agree with both those perspectives, that there's basic goodness to existence, but also like it's like holding the horror and the goodness at the same time. And I wonder sometimes, about the philosophy of Gurdjieff. Well, I don't know if my question is clearly, Luke, but um,
So
about
is
good
sorry, is
about
it,
goodness in Gurdjieff, like that aspect. Um,
yes, goodness. Which of course Gurdjieff said that our ideas of good and evil have corrupted the modern world. Yet he speaks a great deal about good and evil himself. Bulgy Bub's Tales is about Bulgy Bub, who has been exiled by God, to this far off place in the nether regions, where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth, almost this planet Earth or the solar system awes, and how he needs to redeem himself, which is redeemed by grace, really, but he renders a service. And so this idea for good and evil, in a sense, for Gurdjieff, is quite relative. If you're asleep in yourself, if you're mechanical, if you're just going with all the reflexive kind of mechanism, the body, the flesh, one works as an animal, then what's good is eating a lot, having lots of sex, and possibly fighting to make sure that you keep what you've acquired. That is good. That is good. But if there's this other movement, this something else, then the relationship begins to change. And so Gurdjieff seems to intimate here that our orientation becomes critical in our sense of goodness. And for him, in order to even have a sense of goodness, one needs to wake up a little, because there's all these downward forces, literal energies, and he has quite a complex cosmology and energetic structure to it. These great egoic forces are forcing us into one direction. And so how do we navigate? How do we swim upstream, without dismantling the body and the flesh? Because it's needed. God's given us a body. I didn't make mine. I'm not quite sure if you made yours, but I seem to pop into this world and I've got this fleshy pinky thing that grows.
Hmm.
And so what does that mean? Well, for starters, there's a debt there. It's someone's bought me a house, paid off the mortgage before I even start. So what do I need to do? I need to understand my animal body. I need to understand my wolf. I need to understand what it does and why it's needed, and also when it's not needed. And also hopefully have a sense that there's something else, and maybe that can give me a direction of goodness.
so the
Coming back
wolf
to
pays the
Jeff's.
debt.
So,
So
well,
the wolf helps to pay the debt.
the wolf can help to pay the debt rather than make more of it.
Yeah.
And so that's the interesting part. And Gurdjieff talks a lot about this. He talks a lot about we can become a particle of that greatness, as he calls it, the body of Christ, I would call it. Or we can go the opposite way and increase the suffering of God. So in a way, Gurdjieff
Yeah, the
kind of treats
suffering of
it
God,
as,
that's a radical statement, right?
yeah,
And
but
I found that in Jewish tradition, and but the suffering of God, yeah. Can we elaborate on that a bit? Because that blows me away somehow.
well, it's interesting, and one could go down rabbit holes, but um, it goes back to Gurdjieff's cosmology, really. Really, why did God create the universe in the way that he created it? And for me, I haven't come across anything that quite puts it like this, that is unusual. But it's because God had to. he was compelled by the force of his own willness or presence, that the universe as he originally made it was too perfect and lost its possibilities, and he would lose his own dwelling place if he didn't do something. And so for Gurdjieff, God had to seriously consider the universal laws that allowed the universe to run. And so he changed them, and he changed them in a critical way. He introduced this idea of risk, of hazard, that could renew the possibilities of the universe constantly. And for that requires conscious agents, because when you introduce risk, you introduce possibility, you introduce what we would call free will. You know, that there's choices, and every choice matters. And so for Gurdjieff, God's suffering was, which is a real kind of predicament for God when you make creatures who have the capacity for free will, they also have the capacity to go completely against what you wish for them. And that's the nature of the hazard. So there's this calling out almost to God. God ends up being the part of this Holy Spirit, the reconciling force in the universe.
I like
That's
the idea that
always coming.
we always like that the God suffers because it means that we're not it means that we're part of creation. I didn't express that very well.
Well, it may be in a sense, and Gurdjieff speaks to this, the Bible speaks to this. It's, you know, it's like being a good parent. You know, when your children go astray
Yeah.
and they start to disobey and become rebellious or think that they know better than you, creates all sorts of problems. But yet, in a sense, God can't take control in those moments of choice because he needs them. He needs them to renew something. He needs that choice to come back into his dwelling place, in a sense. So there's this really interesting relationship that, for Gurdjieff, that God needs us just as much as we need God. And this is the critical thing. We're all important individually and collectively because we all have this great cosmic role to play. And while we might be small, every act is significant. So even the drama of Christ, this one guy, just one guy 2,000 years ago, who did this mental thing, went through this torturous death for the sake of everyone else. That one act has changed the world, that one choice. And I think this is what Gurdjieff comes at, that
Because
we don't sense the gravity of our choices enough.
yeah. And that kind of, I'm going to say a sort of outrageous thing, but what came to my mind when you were speaking is that solves the meaning crisis pretty much. You know, the meaning crisis is over because if you have that much of a responsibility, there's no meaning crisis. Forget it; it's over. Right? If that's what your job is, then there's no meaning crisis.
Like the simplest possible way is when you've lost track of that, you're on your way to a meaning crisis. And when you've reconnected with that, you've restored yourself from it. Can I do two things? And
Sure.
And unfortunately, I think I'm running out of time. I hear clinking dishes in the background. So in terms of God's suffering, we can also talk about God's grief. And these are very deeply connected. And I've really been reflecting on this asymmetry of the parable of gifts. You know, so you would give good gifts to your children. Just so much more would God give good gifts to you. But the same kind of construct is exactly as I said, when my child is suffering, I feel profound grief. I feel more grief for the suffering of the ones that I love than I feel for my own suffering by a lot. So much more grief God feels for our suffering. And that's very important to keep that in mind. And this is, of course, because of then freedom. And I just feel like it's kind of useful or necessary because I feel like we're very silly about this. So let me just give you a way of thinking about a construct that I've thought about for quite some time, which is this. From the third person point of view, this is very nerdy, but from the third person point of view, from the objective point of view, from standing outside and looking at, reality is divided into the lawful and the chance. That which is determined and that which is random, or straight physics. And I have that which can be reliably and precisely predicted on the basis of what is understood, and that which cannot, even if I took a measurement that was very precise, it is strictly outside of the bound of prediction. So I have these two ontological states of epistemology, chance and perfect determinism. From the third person point of view, from the first person point of view, the thing that looks like chance from the outside is what's called choice from the inside. So when you're looking at me, you see determined and chance, i.e., I couldn't predict it based upon my measures. It's part of reality that there's a limit to my understanding, and that limit is a hard limit in the nature of reality itself. When I'm experiencing it from the inside, I'm experiencing as, here are the constraints that I have nothing to do, and here is something where I have complete freedom and responsibility. Like, this is me. This is the part of reality that I am stewarding. And I experience that as choice. So when you look at the question of free will using a third person frame, you're not going to see it. But when you look at it from a first person frame, you can't not see it. So FYI, that's like just a little, it's been bugging me. So I thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, this conversation is totally unfair because it's very early in the morning for Luke, and it's very late at night for me. And you're just in the middle of the day, so your mind is able to. I'm not sure if my mind can process your last thought, Jordan. I have to listen to it again and think about it.
Nice. Luke, it was really, really nice to meet you. I think it was good. It was providential. So thank you, Andrew, for provoking this conversation.
Oh, with enormous pleasure. Yeah. I'm happy to do it anytime. I love talking to you guys, and thanks so much.
No, thank you. Thank you. And nice to meet you, Jordan. And thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you.
With great pleasure. Okay.
All right. Cheers, gentlemen.